Hey, everybody, welcome to Beyond the Weight Room podcast. This is episode 16 with me and Mr. Ryan Hurston here. Ryan, you just got off the river?
Yeah, we're fishing the Farmington. Game got banged, so we decided to hit the water because we typically have Mondays off, and because
There you
it's
go.
July 4th, we're traveling to Binghamton, lovely Binghamton, New York,
God,
tomorrow.
I love Binghamton. It's my favorite spot.
Binghamton,
So totally
the Bing Bong.
can't beat that. At least you'll get some fireworks from the 4th. It's always nice sitting out in the outfield watching some fireworks with the boys after, unless it's a get out day, then that would suck. But
Nothing
I
like
assume it's
watching
not.
fireworks with the boys.
With the boys. Cool. Well, we haven't caught up in a while, so figure we'd hop on here, do a little podcast, talk about some stuff that you've been dealing with in season. And yeah, just firing off some questions there. So I know we're talking about originally stubborn athletes. So you can elaborate on why that was a topic of choice that came to the front of your brain there.
I just think whenever you work with any team, I mean, whether it's youth, high school, hockey, or professional baseball, right? Like, there's always going to be people that don't perceive the weight room or strength and conditioning the same way we do, and then the same way other players might. And, just thinking about how do you approach guys in that situation, because it's very easy to just kind of get upset or either brush them off to the side. But guess what? The guys that are typically the most stubborn are the guys that they typically pay the most money. So I think that's just something that we could kind of gloss over here and talk about. And just kind of get each other's takes on what it's like to work with those guys. I know for me, it's always trying to meet them where they're at is the first thing. Like, you have to understand where they're coming from, right? Like, a kid that is raised in the middle of Florida is going to be a lot different than a kid who went to a prep school in Colorado. And being able to talk to both of them different ways at the same time is something that I've definitely learned how to do a little bit better over my career, especially in baseball. But I think that's step number one, right? Like, trying to figure out who they are as a person, what their values are outside of sports, because that could give you some insight into how they go about their day-to-day operations.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to say too. Is just like meeting them in the middle, figuring out what they do. They might not do the weight or not want to do the weight room in the same capacity that like you're used to, or even the rest of the team's used to. You were talking about the difference between somebody coming from, private school to middle of Florida. Like, I was thinking like the young Dominican kids that came up, most of them, it's not that it's an education piece too, but it's like they just haven't done it at all. So it's like you don't even know if they don't like it because they haven't even done it. And I know for me, at least, part of that was a lot of the academies down there didn't even have like great weight rooms or anything we would assume is a weight room. And I remember, I think it was with the Sox, their facility didn't have a squat rack down there. So all they had was a leg press. And so like all the guys would come up and they would like want a leg press every day instead of like squat. So like to get them to do something different was challenging. And I understand that because they did this one thing and that was part of the routine that then got them to the States, which is a huge step for them, right? And for some of them, they've quote unquote made it already. So I think that's a big part of it too. It is like understanding where they're at, like you said, and then just educating them on why we're potentially changing things.
Yeah, there's two different types of stubborn that I've come across, right? There's the young and experienced, whether they're Latin players or high school players or even college guys, right? Like, just inexperienced and uneducated on the benefits of what our department does. For those guys, I find it very easy when I say meet them where they're at to translate as much as possible to why we're doing what we're doing and how that's going to affect them on the field, right? Say you got a big 6'3", 220-pound Latin player that doesn't like squatting. Okay, well, tell them, hey, we got to squat to build up your legs. More bigger legs, stronger legs equals more home runs.
Mucho pop.
Yeah, I mean, like, it doesn't need to be this super scientific thing for for guys in that position. Number one, like they're not ready for it. Number two, if you want to get them to that point, you have to start very simplistic.
Yep.
The other guys that can be very stubborn are the guys that are super smart. Like they might be smarter than you, so they think they know more than you. So they're just going to constantly test you. They don't trust you out of the gate, and they're going to put you in positions to see how you answer. Those guys, I think, are fairly easy to work with. You know, I think we both are under the pretense of like, I'm not going to give a guy an answer if I don't know what I'm talking about. I'll just be straight up and honest with them and tell you like, hey, I don't know. I'll get back to you. I think that's a good way to build respect with those types of guys. But having like genuine conversations about training, motor patterns, motor preference, all this stuff, especially in my world right now with baseball and how to train and different ways of training is what I see on a daily basis with some of these guys that are just, you know, driveline. Think of driveline, right? Like nowadays, a lot of these pitchers know more than pitching coaches knew 10 years ago. They know how to perceive their metrics. So they like tinkering, and that kind of translates over into the weight room with some of their specificity stuff. So I think, you know, being able to have that conversation and also stand firm and what you believe, they don't necessarily need to agree with you, but I think there needs to be a level of respect that's shown for our positions with these athletes. And as long as there's respect there, like I'm going to give it back to them. And if they come to me with something that they think is best for them and they can explain why they're doing what they're doing, like more often than not, I'm going to at least allow some of that to take place in our programming. But I'll tell them, you know, hey, if something happens and you tighten up while you're out on the field, like we're going to have a different conversation.
Yeah.
And that's just, you know, us watching our own backs.
Yeah. I think you can also kind of help the situation out with, you know, whether it be somebody that's new to it, to weightlifting, or like you said, just super smart, or even potentially just lazy, which happens in high level of sports too. And I think you can also just almost put things in your program to help them feel like they're making those choices. It's like, you know, like the easy stuff, right? I did like choice biceps all the time. I don't care what type of bicep curl you're doing. They're like, oh, cool. I get to pick what I'm going to do or whatever. Or you give them the choice of, all right, you can do back squat or trap bar deadlift a day. And it's like, we both know those are very similar, you know, at the end of the day. You know, picking some things and letting them make those decisions, I think is helpful. And like you said, it builds trust, and, you know, they're going to listen to you a little bit more potentially. And then while they're doing, you know, let's say they pick the trap bar, everybody else in the room is doing back squat or whatever, you can explain to them what the difference is and why you would potentially choose this over that. So I think that education piece helped. Just funny story. I remember going back to like the Dominicans that were all leg pressing. We had one kid come up. He was like 17-year-old prospect, you know, playing every day, right? Because he was the prospect, a short. And he kept on just wanting to do the leg press. And like one day I got him to finally like start back squatting. Obviously we're going super light, and we all know there's no direct translation like right away to any of that kind of stuff, but he had a home run that night. So then he wanted to do back squat like all the time from then on and stopped leg pressing. I was like, dude, sometimes whatever. Perfect.
Yeah. Sometimes it works.
Nothing to do with it, but yeah. But then, you know, like I mentioned briefly, you know, you have the third group of people that are just like lazy at the end of the day. And you're going to have people that, you know, they might want to put in the work on the field, or they might not, honestly. It might just be very skilled athlete in general, which happens. And they got to the point where they're at now just because of specific skill. But they never want to put that work in the weight room. And those were always the hardest people to work with, in my opinion, obviously. And it's still like just trying to meet them in the middle and get them to do something. It's like, okay, you're not going to come in and go heavy on your back squat. You know, like, can we even get you to do like a mobility routine, for God's sakes? Like what's the bare minimum we can get this person to do? And since it is pro sport, that's more difficult. And I think that's one reason why I have gravitated towards the rehab setting. I kind of found, you know, when you're in the rehab setting, most, if not everybody, on a day-to-day basis wants to get better because they don't want to be hurt anymore, right? So they're coming in there wanting to get better. So, you know, if we're working with high school hockey kids, you might have a couple kids in a group of 20 that they don't even want to play hockey. They don't even want to be there. Their parents want them to play hockey, and their parents pay for them to be there. And maybe they're not even friends with the people they're there with. And they become the shitheads of the group, or they become recluse and don't want to do anything, right? And it's like those people are difficult to work with for sure. And just trying to figure out how you can meet them in the middle and give them something that's going to help them.
Yeah, one thing I do for guys like that, because I mean, baseball is such a skill-oriented sport that you're going to have really great players that are just very inherently lazy outside of game time. And, one way that I found to have success with that is I will give them a stopwatch, or I'll time it and just be like, hey, like once we hit 15 minutes, like you're done. But for that 15 minutes, like no phone, no headphones, no Snapchat, like you're with me for this 15 minutes. It doesn't need to be this 30, 45, 60-minute long ordeal. Like, again, if they're that type of guy, like come in, do something. Something's better than nothing. We can build on something more than we can build on nothing.
Yeah.
And we'll just go from there. Going back to what we're saying, right? Like autonomy, giving choices. I'm a big fan of menu style for guys. I just think that makes
sense. Terminology. I've never heard of that called like that.
Menu style.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, like give them the option, right? Yeah. Like we know one of the guys I work with always refers to it as the sandbox, right? Like we build the sandbox, we put the toys in the sandbox, but they get to choose which toys they play with. Like I think that's a very good analogy for kind of how we with the Rockies like set up our training. If you look at a lot of our training, it's not just one upper body move, one lower body move. I mean, it's 4 options for bench, 4 options for a horizontal row, 3 options for their lower body that day. Like, I think in the 3 years I've been there, the compliance has gone up because we see these menu style options that guys, not a whole lot of guys pick rear foot elevated split squats in season.
But then does it, I guess, when you're doing that, if you notice that they're all going one direction, do you ever try to have a time where you make them do those things they're not picking?
I don't know if I've really ever been in that instance because we're trying to train
a movement pattern.
The movement pattern, right? Yeah. So, like, is it the end of the world if a guy does a reverse lunge instead of a rear foot elevated split squat? No. Some ways that I can change a reverse lunge is I can go front foot elevated, especially if they're somebody with like freakishly long legs, to get them a little bit more depth that they probably wouldn't get through a reverse lunge before their back knee touches the ground. That's kind of one thing I've changed. We use a lot of like gymwear stuff for deadlifts and squats. So like I would rather play around with those parameters than try to change up their entire move to something they necessarily wouldn't want to do.
Yeah.
I think the biggest one that I see, right, is pitchers that don't want to do overhead movements, whether that be a landmine press or pull-ups. And I'm completely okay with that. Like, look, like if you've had any history of shoulder issues and you don't want to do pull-ups, like fine.
Yeah.
We'll go high to low cable row. Like,
yeah, you got that. I mean, me and you did that here, and I got that from the White Sox, that like split stance, high to low row position. You get that whole scapular, protraction, and it's great. And you're not getting everything all potentially pinched up overhead. Baseball players in general their shoulders are built different than the rest of us because they've been playing baseball their whole lives. They're literally looser, like bone structure wise. So I don't think you can treat it exactly the same. I think you need to do overhead stuff, and not necessarily, doesn't have to be like pressing and stuff like you said. So
yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think.
Deficit? Have you ever done deficit Bulgarians? Like front
players? No, because that would blow. I've done them, but that would blow them up in season.
I know you're just talking about the guy that like long levers, knee hitting the ground, and I was like thinking the deficits would help fix that. But I mean, they're fucking dope.
I've never the only things that I really change is loading pattern, right? Like, so we do a lot of like front rack positions. Again, the thing with baseball players is they're finicky with having things on the front side of their shoulder. Yeah. So you can go dumbbell, you can go safety bar. That's one. I think I use a safety bar more often now than I did when I first got into it. I still prefer a front rack. Like, I think you can load with less weight and get the same response with a front rack, but I completely understand why baseball players in general, pitchers specifically, don't want to do that.
Yeah, you can get a similar thing with a safety bar. So if you have a safety bar, it's like,
especially like those transformer bars now, like those are top of the line for being able to just change stuff and patterns. Sometimes like I'll change, say they want to load up squats, but they don't really want to go through the bracing effect, or they're just kind of shot, their low backs sore or whatever. Like we have a belt squat. I'll make them do belt squat stuff and just bump up the volume on that because they're able to just push more weight on a belt squat, but it also kind of gives them that traction on their hips, which they like from time to time. I just don't want somebody to do belt squats all the time because they're just not getting the bracing effect through their midsection. So I'll be upfront about that with them. Like, hey, we can do this. We can belt squat, but like you're not going to get the same midsection or core or abdominal, whatever you want to call it, effect that you would if you have a bar on your back. By the way, I tried to squat for the first time yesterday again after the incident in spring training, right?
Oh, shit. That was a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your back
didn't go well. No, can't do it. So I'm non-axial for life at this point. I thought it was going to be good. And then
what kind of squat did you try?
I was going to a box, safety squat bar to a box. Did 160.
Might be better. Why don't you do like?
Yeah. So I've done some single leg stuff with a front load. But I was like, I just want to see what it feels like. 160 felt fine. 205 did not.
You really fucked some shit up there, didn't you?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think I'm done squatting with stuff on my back, so I'll have to stick with front squats
For now. I was going to tell you something now. I can't remember. So blacked out, while you're talking. Cool, man. When you were talking about all the different styles of like squatting and moving and how you guys generally pick movement patterns, it was getting me to think about you know how it is in the strength and conditioning world. You get people that have their one way of doing things and it almost becomes like their religion. And like, if you say things a different way as a strength coach, it's like, you're going to, you two are going to fight or battle or whatever it is. It's stupid in my opinion. Cause I think everything in strength and conditioning for the most part, like has a part, right. To potentially be utilized. But I don't know. Well, I think I do know how you feel about this, but just wanted to talk about it too. Like when people don't want to use barbells at all for like the squatting positions, do you have any athletes that come in that just don't want to utilize barbells? Do you have that conversation with them? What goes on from there, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I don't think this goes for everybody that does this program, but the guys that do Cressy's program, or try to follow along with Cressy stuff because they train with them in the off season. Like I see them doing way more like goblet style stuff. And really like at the end of the day, it is their decision to train how they want to train. I am there to assist and help them make those decisions. I tell them my concerns with that, right? Like, yes, you can pick up a 95-pound dumbbell and do split squats, but what happens after 95 pounds? Like what happens when that becomes easy? Ways that I've worked with guys that are very finicky about that. And this is apart from people who are non-axial and cannot load their back, whether they had a spondy or something with their spine, right?
Yeah,
like those
injury is totally different.
Yeah.
In general.
I just try to tell them my viewpoint on why loading is important and how that differs from dumbbell loading. I think a lot of it comes down to a bracing perspective, especially through your midsection, and that includes your back, your low back, your hips.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think
durable if you do that type of stuff. So what I've done to try to like meet guys in the middle, right, is I'll either bump their volume up, or I'll add in tempos, isos, eccentrics. I've been doing a lot of Gambetta circuits with guys recently, and
buddy,
that you taught me, just to add a little variance, especially if like we're just trying to blow their legs up. Say they just had a bullpen or they just had a start and they're just fatigued, but they need to get some work in. Like I'd much rather do that, right, than throw a bar on their back and just dig a deeper hole.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways to work around it. It's not my favorite. I would prefer they do stuff with a bar. I think now that we have belt squats, that kind of mitigates some of that too. I don't ever want to negate anybody's feelings towards putting a bar on their back. Yeah. I don't think that's
even the belt squat though is not going to be the same.
Correct.
Because it is. We used to do ISO back squats at 90 degrees with force plates. And when I first like messed I think it was my hip labrum. When I first messed that up, I would like get to a certain force and then everything would shift over my right side, which, you know, that probably shows you that I probably shouldn't have a bar on my back at that point, but I had an injury. And then same time frame, I would go over and we had just switched it to doing belt squats. We were kind of doing both at the time. So I was doing belt squats, same thing, 90 degrees. And I was like, I didn't have that hiccup. And it's like literally just that translation of having the weight going through my core, through my hips, down into my legs versus being around my hips, down to my legs. Like I wasn't having that issue in my hip at all, just from having the axial load. So at the end of the day, like I think, I think people that aren't using barbells in their training are missing out on something. I think we need to be able to utilize everything in our training. And I think by having that weight and the actual load, you're going to be able to develop a lot more core stability and just, is this even a word? Rigidity? Is that a word?
Durability, rigidity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just going to build up that overall durability to have that heavy load on top of your back. Do I think you can get a lot of the similar effects of having the dumbbells and kettlebells in your hands, in your legs and in your hips? Absolutely. But I think having that core stability from the axial load is much, much needed. So if you're not doing that, I feel like you're just missing out on that.
And I don't have any specific numbers, but I mean, anecdotally, guys that don't load are the guys who have flare-ups, and especially in their back. Weak things break, and we have to realize, a lot of athletics is about transfer of force from the ground up through the body, especially in a sport like baseball where there's just rapid and excessive amounts of extension, especially in the back. So anecdotally, I would say like guys who don't load super heavy are the guys that are more prone for some of those, low backs, tight hips, obliques, midsection injuries.
Yeah. That definitely aligns with what I'd seen, at least in baseball specifically. I think you can get on both sides of it. Like if you get, maybe it's not even too heavy, but if you're going too heavy and not getting the range of motion as well, then you almost get like too tight in the hips. And, I think people see that and associate that type of lifting with like barbell, heavy barbell squatting. It's like, well, if you're going full range of motion and you're going heavy for that full range of motion, like you should be fine in all those ranges. Your mobility should be fine and all that kind of stuff. If I'm shortening my range of motion to get that extra weight or whatever, then yeah, I'm probably going to be locked up in certain areas because I'm powerlifting. Then I'm not training for a sport, so we're training for movement, I guess. But cool. So I think we solved all the world's problems, right?
Good job in 23 minutes so far.
What's up?
We've done a really good job solving the world's problems in 23 minutes. And now, you're back.
Yeah, I was gonna say we paused for a second there. So, cool, man. Well, we're gonna try this again next Sunday and bring somebody on.
Yeah, let's get somebody on here. So it's not just
baseball season's been screwing you, man. So
I know.
We'll get some new heads on here. Excited to get this thing rolling again. Me and Ryan are going to be meeting up on Sundays, talking shop, and getting some interesting people on here for, the 2 people that listen to this to listen. So
maybe 3.
Yeah, 3 now. Sure. Why not? Thanks, guys.